Hey, I'm Nancy Cavey, National ERISA and Individual Disability Attorney. Welcome to Winning Isn't Easy. Before we get started, the Florida Bar tells me that I have to tell you that this podcast is not legal advice. But nothing will ever prevent me from giving you an easy-to-understand overview of the disability insurance world, the games that carriers play, and what you need to know to get the disability benefits you deserve. So, off we go. Do you have ME/CFS or fibromyalgia? Now, I've talked about this disease or these diseases in other episodes, but they're among the trickiest of illnesses to litigate because they're ambiguous, they're hard to diagnose, they're based on subjective complaints, and disability carriers, quite frankly, hate these types of claims. Today, I want to talk about three specific topics. Now, just because this episode is focused on ME/CFS or fibromyalgia doesn't mean that you should just stop listening, because these topics can relate to other disability claims. It doesn't matter if you have ME/CFS or fibromyalgia, MS, Parkinson's, you name it. These are the types of issues that arise in all disability claims. So first, I'm going to talk about meeting the elimination period in your long-term disability policy if you have ME/CFS or fibromyalgia. 2, the 8 reasons used by disability carriers to justify a claims denial of an ME/CFS or fibromyalgia disability insurance claim. And the you really have a psychiatric impairment and not a disability insurance claim based on your ME/CFS or fibromyalgia game that disability carriers play. Got it? All right, let's take a break for a moment before we get started. Welcome back to Winning Isn't Easy. You really have a psychiatric impairment and not a disability insurance claim based on your ME/CFS game that disability carriers play. Now, disability carriers like First UNUM play lots of games in ME/CFS claims. And one of the games is called, you really have a psychiatric impairment, you don't have a disability claim. It's all in your head. What do I mean by that? So let me give you the story of Tam, Miss Tam, who was a software engineer, and she had chronic fatigue and ME/CFS. Now, this is a case out of California, and it is versus First UNUM. She applied for it. She was paid her short-term disability benefits after a carrier IME found that she was severely impaired. The IME noted she was depressed, anxious, and tearful during the IME. And the IME concluded that she had major depression secondary to CFS. She applied for her LTD benefits and made it clear that she was disabled not by her mental health conditions, but from a physical standpoint, which is appropriate. Now, UNUM had her claim reviewed by 4 physicians. One was an occupational medicine doctor, another was an internist. And neither, in my view, are competent or qualified to evaluate an ME/CFS case. And that, unfortunately, is a common thing that we see in denials. Now, notwithstanding her request, UNUM had her case reviewed by a Dr. Cletty, a psychiatrist. Cletty didn't actually examine Tam. He noted her history of mental health treatment, including prescriptions, and he commented that her symptom complaints, particularly fatigue and cognitive dysfunction, were common in psychiatric illnesses. Now, guess what? They're also common and hallmark symptoms of ME/CFS and fibromyalgia. Dr. Cletty alleged that her infectious disease specialist had made no mention of any psychiatric concerns, conditions, or impairments. That was wrong. In fact, the treating rheumatologist, infectious medicine specialist had. But you can see this is the beginning of the cherry-picking expedition. Cletty disagreed with the medical opinion provided by the short-term disability provider's psychiatric IME. And again, this isn't uncommon either, where the LTD peer review provider disagrees with the short-term disability peer review providers. Now, for some unknown reasons, UNUM doubled down on the psychiatric evaluations and used a guy by the name of Stuart Shipko. He's well known in the ERISA world. Just Google him, look at the cases, and you'll figure out what's going on. And Shipko, of course, did not examine her, but looked at the records and ultimately disagreed with the IME doctor. So Cletty and Shipko didn't think that Tam was disabled from a psychiatric standpoint, but they never really addressed the physical aspects of her disability, which is what she had asked to be done. They went off on the, well, we think it's all in her head analysis of this claim. And of course, UNUM denied the claim. Ms. Tam submitted additional testing, including neuropsychological testing. So UNUM played another game. They had the file reviewed by a fifth doctor, Dr. Norris. Dr. Norris specializes in family medicine, occupational medicine, and aerospace medicine. Not a rheumatologist, not an infectious medicine doctor. And Norris said, well, so much for those neuropsychological reports. They're not time relevant, and I don't think they're important. And by the way, I'm not really going to comment on the physical aspects of her disability. So obviously, at the end of the day, UNUM upholds the denial, saying that she could do the duties of her regular occupation. Fortunately, she didn't give up, and she filed a lawsuit. And I will tell you that the judge was not impressed with the UNUM playbook denial, noting that not one of the 5 peer review providers had any experience with her multiple medical conditions. He noted that Cletty and Shipko focused on the psychiatric aspects of the claim, even though it wasn't the basis of the claim. And the paper reviews conducted by the UNUM physicians mischaracterized the evidence, they ignored the evidence, and they cherry-picked the evidence. Now, the court also criticized UNUM's demand that Tam submit objective evidence of a medical condition, noting that ME/CFS is characterized by subjective complaints of fatigue and pain. And the court said, look, you can't have it both ways. The nature of this disease is one in which there isn't necessarily objective evidence, and the complaints that she's made are consistent with the nature of the disease. So the judge was not impressed. The judge also looked at the neuropsychological evaluation, and UNUM argued that it wasn't time-related because medical records rendered retrospectively should not be ignored. In other words, just because the test happened after the fact isn't a sufficient basis to ignore it, like UNUM had urged. UNUM said, we're not going to look at it, it's not time relevant, we don't really care. The judge said, oh, no, the test should have been considered in combination with all the medical records. And ultimately, the judge was not happy that UNUM had challenged Tam's credibility and that UNUM had never even bothered to have her undergo an IME. They had spent a lot of money getting 5 reviews, and quite frankly, the more legitimate way to deny the claim would have been to send her for a higher, not so independent medical evaluation with a doctor who would give them a guaranteed opinion that either she didn't have ME/CFS or that the ME/CFS was not as disabling as claimed, and that her restrictions and limitations weren't consistent with her presentation on exam. So this is a good example of the games that disability carriers will play in ME/CFS claims and other types of claims. Ultimately, the court awarded Ms. Tam her benefits, finding that the testing was valid and a credible measure of her medical conditions. So don't give up if your claim's been denied. Got it? I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of Winning Isn't Easy. If you've enjoyed this episode, consider liking the page, leaving a review, sharing it with your family or friends, and better yet, subscribe to this podcast. That way you're going to be notified when the next episode comes out. I hope you tune in next week for another insightful episode of Winning Isn't Easy.